have you ever just been relaxing at home and then all of a sudden you think, man, I really hate Zelda 2? Well, congratulations, you have ADHD, and you're also not unique.
You know, a wise man once said, unpopular opinions are like assholes. Everyone's got one, not everyone wants to go in depth with them. I could talk all day about how Zelda 2 is an overrated, over-difficult piece of dog shit, but nobody would listen to me, so please take this video with a grain of salt. These are just my opinions, and you can feel free to disagree with them and leave your own opinions down in the comments.
Let's kick things off with a bang. I think the Let's Go games are far better than Pokemon Sword and Shield.
I know the hardcore Pokemon fans are going to want to burn me at the stake for this, but there's a lot of reasons why I feel this way. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee trimmed a lot of the fat away from the traditional Pokemon games. There's no grinding in order to gain experience, you just catch Pokemon. The overall difficulty is also a little bit easier for newcomers, which is fine because they offer tons of post-game content that's super difficult. The gameplay is still fun and addicting, and the range of Pokemon you can catch, being the original 150 plus Meltan, is great. I really love the ability to add Pokemon from Pokemon Go as well. But overall, what sticks out to me the most about this game is how goddamn gorgeous it was. This looks like a true next generation Pokemon experience. And on a completely unrelated note, yeah, I know people have talked about the graphics in this game to death, but it goes far deeper than just the graphics. The overall layout and presentation in this game is just bleak and boring, especially the wild areas, which are unfortunately the most fun areas in the game. This is where you're going to be spending the most amount of time, but compare that to literally any area in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee where it's bright and colorful, you can see everything that's going on and it's nice and vibrant. The wild areas in Sword and Shield are fun, but they're just such a bore to look at. However, you can lower your pitchforks because my biggest complaint about this game isn't the presentation. I'm about to throw something completely new onto the table. These games have way too much goddamn dialogue. Now I know what you're thinking. Danny, you're complaining about dialogue in an RPG. And yes, I am. But the dialogue in this game seems so superfluous. Compare that to the original games or Let's Go, where you can find your way around perfectly fine without anyone holding your hand. If you wanted to talk to an NPC, the game would reward you by telling you some important information, but you didn't have to do that. The game would never lock you into a conversation with anything that wasn't super important. Whereas in Sword and Shield, every single time you enter in a new area, you're locked into a dialogue tree, and it's annoying. Really? Go to the gym to battle the gym leader? This is a Pokemon game. That's what the point is. And if I can complain once more about Sword and Shield, I feel like it didn't get the care and attention that it really needed. Yeah, everyone and their mother has complained about the National Dex fiasco, and to be honest, I think it's kind of annoying. The tagline for this series used to be "Gotta catch 'em all," and you physically cannot do that in this game. As a matter of fact, if you want to catch any of the Pokemon that they eventually patched in, you have to buy the DLC, which is stupid. But there's proof everywhere that this game was rushed out the door without a second thought. When you catch a water Pokemon, it appears in a grassy plain. I was absolutely nowhere near this field. I don't know why this is appearing here. Also, why would you get rid of Mega Evolutions? That's one of the coolest things the new game's introduced, and you just scrapped it? I could probably fill an entire video with reasons I dislike Sword and Shield, so I'll stop while I'm ahead, but overall, I just find these games to be extremely lackluster, and I find Pikachu and Eevee to be lovely little distractions. I don't think that either one of them compare to like the Soul Pokemon titles, or any of the better remakes out there like Alpha Sapphire and Omega Ruby, but given the choice of a sequel to Sword and Shield or a sequel to Let's Go, I would obviously go with the one to Let's Go, because at least I know that I'm going to be getting a premium experience where I can actually catch them all. And at the end of the day, isn't that the reason why a lot of people play Pokemon? To feed their obsession for completing things?
Hey you, I hate my credibility, and I really am not looking forward to the Super Mario 3D World Switch port because I didn't like the main game. That's right, I think that Super Mario 3D World is crap. And I'm looking forward to being doxxed.
Now before I get into this one, I do need to preface something. The only two 3D Mario games I'd played a significant amount of up until this point were Super Mario 64 and Super Mario Galaxy. And I thought they were both pretty good. I didn't think they were anything groundbreaking. I mean, Super Mario 64 itself ages like 17-year-old spoiled milk, but aside from that, I thought they were fun. The only thing that I really disliked about those games was that the camera at times wasn't great. Mario 64 does have an excuse for this, considering the fact that that game is older than the current known universe, so I guess I can't go too hard on it, but at times Galaxy's camera can be a bit wonky too. The difference here is that Galaxy didn't really need extremely good camera controls, because the environments were so open and vast that you could just simply walk around and the camera would correct itself. A game like Mario 64 can't really do that. Now I know what you're thinking, Danny, you've been talking about the camera for the last 45 seconds, move on to something else. And to be honest, I can't really complain about these games other than that. The controls are pretty damn good, the graphics are always nice and colorful, and the games look great for the platforms they're on. Yeah, sure, Mario 64 looks like ass nowadays, but that's only because the Nintendo 64's graphics made the character models look like they were all carved out of birdhouses. Aside from the wonky camera controls and the slightly outdated graphics tech, you can still go back to both of these games nowadays. They still provide a good time and they can be enjoyable experiences. Now, like the previous games, Mario 3D World doesn't do anything inherently bad in terms of game design, but in terms of personal preference, this ticks all of the wrong boxes for me. First thing, the controls. This game controls like ass. It was made to play like a 2D Mario game in the third dimension, and I think it does that quite well, but why on earth would anyone want a run button when playing a 3D game on a console that has a perfectly good analog stick? It's completely pointless. If you're gonna add a run button, make it optional in a game like this, or make it one of the triggers. Having to have one of my thumbs permanently press down the B button doesn't add anything extra to the gameplay, it just makes me wish I was playing a traditional 2D Mario game instead. The levels were designed deliberately to take advantage of the run button as opposed to analog controls, so I can't dock it too much for that. I feel like the game does that quite well enough. I just hate having to press down a run button when I'm playing a 3D platformer on a console that has an analog stick, created by the people who made playing 3D platformers with analog sticks the norm 20 years prior. But as much as these controls frustrate me, they don't annoy me nearly as much as the biggest gripe I have with this game, the camera. The camera in 3D World is fucked beyond belief. I find myself careening off of platforms, missing jumps, and hurling into enemies constantly. And the worst part is, most of the time they don't even let you adjust the camera to how you want. You have to play with how the developers intended, even if it's ass. In my opinion, and this is not hyperbole, Mario 64's camera is leagues better than this, and it's 20 years older. I have no idea what they were thinking. They should have either made the levels more expansive so the direct camera controls would actually make sense and they could give you the option for them, or they should have developed a better system for the camera to follow the player like it does in, say, Sonic games. That's one thing I will always argue Sonic does better than Mario's cameras. Overall, I'll take literally any other game in the franchise over 3D World. I don't find this to be fun, I find the controls to be frustrating, and I find the camera to be downright unusable at times. I don't like this game.
Speaking of the Wii U, I can't be the only person that thinks that Wii Sports Club is the definitive version of Wii Sports, am I?
Let's get one thing perfectly straight. Wii Sports Club was fucking weird. Instead of opting for a standard physical release like Nintendo had done before, they decided to go for a weird subscription rental service where for $2 you get a day pass, which gives you unlimited access to all of the sports in the game for 24 hours. After that runs out, you either have to pay another $2 to continue playing all of the sports, or you could buy individual sports for $10 a piece. Either way, if you were planning on renting the game ever again, you had to keep the data on your Wii U unless you wanted to re-download all of the games, and even if you did, you had to re-download the games before buying the day pass. If you only bought a single sport and didn't have the day one pass, you still had to go to the Wii Sports Club menu and look at all the sports that you didn't own in order to get to the one that you did own, which was annoying. And on top of that, even if you didn't buy any of the sports outright or you didn't buy the rental service, you still had to keep the game updated, of course, which means that the game took up over half a gig on your hard drive and you couldn't even play it. After that all failed, because of course it did, Nintendo opted for a standard physical release like they always had. And they printed like 4 copies maximum. Wii Sports Club goes for a downright stupid amount on eBay. This is a remake of a Wii game that you can play on your Wii U with no strings attached. You absolutely do not need to buy this game, but if you do want it, and you do get it, you'll notice that this is the nicest looking Wii Sports title to date. The graphics clean up absolutely beautifully, the controls are the same as they've always been. Wii Sports Club is a phenomenal experience. I don't think it's worth refinancing your car for, nor do I think you should get this subscription service, which for some reason Nintendo is still offering in 2021 while the Nintendo Switch is out and nobody touches their Wii U anymore. But in my opinion, it's the nicest looking version of this game. Now, why they didn't remaster Wii Sports Resort instead is anybody's guess.
I can't seriously be the only person that thinks that the previous Castlevania games are completely rendered obsolete by Symphony of the Night. Am I? Yes, I'm aware I'm holding this packaging very strange. It doesn't not illustrate my point. Shut up.
Back in the early 80s, the only two styles of video games to exist were the top-down perspective like in Zelda and the 2D side-scrolling perspective like in Super Mario Bros. So a lot of companies were pretty much relegated to these two camera aspects. As a direct result, a lot of 2D platformers had to do certain things to stick out from each other, and Castlevania was no exception to this. In order to not blend into the Super Mario Bros. Scene, they decided to give Castlevania gothic 17th century imagery and a relentless difficulty curve. Everyone that's played these games knows what I'm talking about. They've managed to bridge the gap between fun and cheap hard, but it became very apparent very quickly that these games were one-trick ponies. There wasn't a hell of a lot to them. The uniqueness of the setting and difficulty was beginning to wane its welcome a little bit, so by the time the mid-90s rolled around, they decided to try something a little bit different. On the N64, they played around with a 3D game engine, and the result was great. And on the PlayStation 1, they decided to stick with the tried and true 2D method, but evolved the gameplay quite a lot. Adopting the map system from Metroid and RPG elements, this new Castlevania didn't just reinvent the franchise, it invented a new genre. And in my opinion, Metroidvania wouldn't just be the de facto definitive 2D gameplay style, but would be the only style that Castlevania games would use for years to come until the WiiWare game Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth, a soft reboot of the original Castlevania adventure games from the Game Boy days. Ever since Symphony of the Night, Castlevania fans have been split. Some really like the Metroidvania approach, while others truly miss the 2D side-scrolling approach, and to be honest, I'd never understood the people in the latter camp. Sure, the 2D Castlevania games were fun, but like I said, they were pretty much only known for their setting and difficulty. They didn't really have much of an identity aside from that. Symphony of the Night, oh man, this game is bleeding personality and I absolutely love it. Unlike the 2D games, where learning the game just came with a matter of skill and luck, Castlevania Symphony of the Night introduced progression. And in my opinion, because of this, you're able to connect with someone like Alucard in a much better way than the original Belmonts. The whole theme of this game is getting stronger, regaining your power to defeat Dracula at the very end, and because of that, with the progression system, you're constantly unlocking new weapons, armors, abilities, etc., and that keeps the game fresh, but also you feel yourself grow with Alucard as you start to memorize the castle more and more. The old games were only memorable because you would have to play the levels over and over again every time you game overed, whereas a game like Symphony of the Night, you learn the castle through genuine exploration, not repetition. And in my opinion, this completely renders most other 2D platformers, including every other previous Castlevania, entirely obsolete. Why would I want to go back to the standard left-to-right linear gameplay of the older Castlevania games when I can have something a lot more dynamic and interesting, something that allows me to feel like I'm growing with the character and connecting as a result? While I did enjoy the earlier Castlevania games before I started playing Metroidvanias a lot more often, nowadays I find them kind of pointless to go back to. The entire time I'm thinking, wow, I could be playing Symphony of the Night or one of the Game Boy Advance titles and having a much better time. Now don't get me wrong, there's a lot of genres that wouldn't work in Metroidvania, like Mario for example. I can't picture a Mario Metroidvania working out at all, but for Castlevania we already have a clear roadmap of what new Castlevania games should be. Just copy Symphony of the Night, it's the next clear evolution of the gameplay. While I think the 2D older Castlevanias are fun little distractions at most, I unfortunately don't see them as much more than that anymore. The Metroidvania style is where the future of the franchise deserves to be, if Konami ever decides to revive it.
This final one may genuinely get me shot. I think that the PlayStation Vita is a far better dedicated handheld than the Nintendo Switch. Yes, I'm serious.
The PlayStation Vita is one of the most underrated video game consoles ever released. Nobody bought this thing. If you thought you bought the Vita, you probably didn't. You probably bought a PSP instead. Nobody bought the Vita. And honestly, I kind of understand why. Sony had weird proprietary software, and smartphones at the time were starting to become the next big thing, so why would people want to buy a dedicated handheld console like the 3DS or the Vita? Well, the 3DS eventually got exclusives that you couldn't get anywhere else, and the Vita just slowly died. Fast forward to 10 years after its initial launch, yes, really, and we can reflect on what the PS Vita truly is, a portable PlayStation 3 that has a hell of a lot of homebrew potential. But before we get into that, let's talk about the Vita itself. Let's talk about the console and how it compares to the Nintendo Switch. The PlayStation Vita's form factor melts in your hands and feels like an actual video game console, whereas the Nintendo Switch feels like a weird dinner tray. I never understood why people love the Nintendo Switch's size so much. I find this thing to be incredibly uncomfortable to play specifically because of how big it is. Next up, the battery. Sony's advertised the Vita can last up to 5 hours on a full charge, but honestly in airplane mode I've gotten well over that. Nintendo on the other hand advertises the Switch can last up to 6 hours, but I don't think I've ever gotten above 2.5 hours even when it was brand new. Maybe it's because I play graphically intensive games on it, but still, the fact that I can barely pull over a 3-hour battery life is kind of pathetic. If I have to bring up backwards compatibility, the PlayStation Vita wipes the floor with the Nintendo Switch. It can play a bunch of PS1 games, a selection of PS2 games, some great PS3 ports, and a bunch of PSP games in Legacy mode. The Nintendo Switch is relegated to whatever they feel like putting on the eShop and the Nintendo Switch Online service, which to this day is still only NES and Super Nintendo games, which are 30 years old and are getting kind of stale. And the biggest problem overall with the Nintendo Switch that the Vita doesn't have is the fact that the Nintendo Switch's Joy-Cons drift. The Vita, despite being significantly older, I've never had a single control issue. The only time I ever thought I was having a control issue with the Vita is when I forgot that the back of the Vita is a touchscreen and I realized that that was affecting the gameplay. I thought that the controller was honestly glitching out, but no, that's just a feature, it's not a glitch. Whereas with the Nintendo Switch, you see those nice green Joy-Cons, you see the nice white joysticks? Those are the third joysticks that those Joy-Cons have had. The other two have drifted. And then finally, this technically doesn't count if you don't plan on modding your consoles, but if you do, which is always a good idea for legacy consoles anyways, you could play some great homebrew games on here. The Vita can play a lot of things, and it's a lot of fun to play on this console. The original Vita had an OLED screen. That is way ahead of its time for 2011. And even the second model that I have here still plays pretty much anything I throw at it totally fine, and it can stream games from the PlayStation 3 and 4 as well, so this is truly a console that just won't die. Overall, I do love my Nintendo Switch, but I just love my PlayStation Vita more when it comes to having a dedicated handheld console. The Switch is great, and it's got some amazing exclusives, but the Vita, in my opinion, it's the most underrated console in my collection. And those are some negative opinions about video games. If you're wondering where I am, I'm in witness protection. Apparently saying bad things about Nintendo makes people want to put hits out on you, so whatever. The good news is, if I'm in witness protection, I'll never be found, so I'll be perfectly safe down. Shit!